just as an acknowledgement, you have people who value freedom over order, and you have people who value order over freedom. And I know that the further we play that out, the stickier it gets. But just to say, do not make an assumption on either side that if you are a person who value freedom, that everybody is going to be like, yeah, it's so stupid that we have to whatever. And that if you're a person who values order, that everybody is going to be like, yeah, we should all do whatever the institution tells us. And so just having that dichotomy, that you could approach someone being like, isn't it so crazy that we've had to or that we haven't? And that they would be like, I think about that in completely a opposite way than you do, I think is really important language for us to understand. Welcome everyone to Cap and Gown. Good to see you all. Matt, we're in two different rooms today.
We are. You have both the south view from the building, and I have the north view. I mean, You also have the north view. I have to look at you to see what's happening north. Look at me. Well, it is Cap and Gown. Glad everyone can join us. I'm Matt Boisvert, joined by Rachel Phillips-Buck. And today, Rachel, we are talking about mental notes, making some mental notes, specifically talking about the challenges of mental health, not only for our students, but also ourselves and our peers, our colleagues, everything that is impacting higher education in regards to our mental well-being. So,
yeah. So a couple of ways for you guys to get connected with us. We post all of our videos to YouTube, so we'd love for you to subscribe, and that way you'll get a notification every time a new one is posted. Also, we know so many of you are listening to us as a podcast, so grateful for you to spend time with us. We had somebody telling us today that they're listening to us on their commute to and fro. I don't know, back and forth. So happy for you to find us wherever you're listening to your podcast. And then all of our resources you can find at taplink.cc/Pharos resources. So love for you to go and check that out. Let me set the stage for what we're going to do today. And then, Matt, I'm going to hand it over to you to give us the State of the Union.
Great.
So, first of all, believe it or not, it is the middle of June. Unbelievable that we have made it this far. I was trying to think about last year, June. So my birthday's in June. I have no recollection of June last year. I feel like we are in the middle. I'm pretty sure we were talking about running a marathon and never knowing when it was going to stop.
Right.
So crazy to mark that spot in our summers within, the rhythm of the academic year. This is a place where so many of us are taking time off. We're thinking about the next semester. We're spending time with our families. We have this rest and relaxation that is going on typically in this time of the year. So that's where we are in the rhythm of the academic year. But we are also considering what is going to be happening in fall of 2021. So we have a conversation to have about that. And really, the reason that we're having this conversation on Cap and Gown today is because although we don't have answers for what the fall is going to look like in terms of people, so what students have experienced, what your employees have experienced, now is the time to be setting up a framework to have those conversations, to be able to assess those things and figure out what's been going on with students. So our goal today is just to talk about what people have been through, how we can make sense of those things, how things are changing, and then how do we set the stage to have healthy leadership through the changes that are coming. So I think it's going to be really interesting and hopefully thought-provoking. And I am very hopeful that all of you who are attending will send me an email afterwards and tell me how to solve the problems that we're going to present today, because I feel like it's an ongoing process of trying to figure out what the fall is going to look like. So,
and I'll say, Rachel, I mean, as we were talking about this topic, makes me a little nervous. Just coming to a place where you actually come to grips with reality and what's happened over this time. I know it's really important, but it's not my nature to dwell on the misery of this past 16 months. So I know that it's going to be challenging for me as we talk through this, because a lot of this applies directly to me.
For sure.
So,
and Matt, let me just say that this process of like, hey, but what are we going to do about it? I don't know that we're there yet, which is why you're saying like, it's not my favorite, right? Because I don't, as your face registers complete disgust and dismay, we're going to get to what we're going to do about it eventually. But today we're just trying to say like, hey, these are things to think about as you're grasping the reality of what's going to happen in the fall. So just stick with me.
Yeah.
Okay, stick with me on this one.
I'm going to try. All right.
Why don't you give us the State of the Union?
I will do that. So, first of all, we have, as far as the State of the Union, as you always talk about, there are updates just overall to the number of schools that are requiring vaccinations, and I would just say overall how they're handling vaccinations. Yeah. So as we've talked about, there's a growing number of schools.
So I have the numbers for you. Let me give them to you. May 3rd, it was 232 requiring vaccinations. June 5th, it was 461. And then today it's 509.
Okay.
So as we've said, like we're just seeing kind of an increase of that. But also some schools are saying we're never going to do it. So it is a developing issue.
Yeah. And one of the things that you had talked about is there are schools that are creating incentives, so giving discounts or extra scholarships. There are also schools that are creating disincentives to not be vaccinated, and by increasing the student fees if you come to campus not vaccinated. So always want to continue that as that number continues to grow and strategies become more clear there. Some news stories that I want to cover. One is just as we've talked about the test optional, this article in Higher Ed Dive talking about how the national test optional experiment has played out at U.S. colleges. And I think what's interesting about this, as schools have started to, so as I've talked about in the past, there's a small number of schools that were test optional, and that's really grown through this. And this article really, what I want to point out here is that now we have 1,400 institutions that are saying that they're going to be test optional.
Wow.
And that it's becoming the new norm. And one thing that's really interesting about that is the number of increased applications as a result.
Right.
And specifically with selective institutions, they have record number of applications, which you can understand that. The common application so there's like 900 number of colleges that use the common app. They reported 6.2 million applications as opposed to, at this time, in May 31st, as opposed to 5.6 million the year before. So wow. Applications are way up. And like I said, that's specifically, see a lot of increases with selective institutions. Cornell is up 30% in applications. So
I mean, because students are basically why not?
Yeah.
If this isn't the criteria that I have to fulfill in order to apply, why wouldn't I apply? Right.
Right.
So,
and
interesting.
So and it is lowering some of those barriers that when we talk about student and equity issues, it's mm-hmm. definitely lowered some barriers and given some students, that idea, why not
to apply.
Yeah. So the second story that I want to talk about, we've also talked about the impact of COVID on college sports, and we've talked about it in several different ways. But this article, also in Higher Ed Dive, did COVID-19 spur bigger changes to how colleges run sports? And I think it's interesting. So we talked about the University of Hartford earlier in May. They said that they were going to move from Division I down to Division III. And there was a belief that there were going to be a lot of schools that started to look at that as a way of kind of changing their expenses. They were looking at college sports as an expense issue to maintain Division I. So this goes on and talks about there's a lot of impacts to cuts. One of the big things, though, that comes back out of this is so a lot of programs, over 350 NCAA sports programs were cut between March and November of 2020. Cut.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Because it's like all of these smaller sports that are depending on March Madness, right, in order to fund them. And they're like, we don't have the money.
And then in the fall with football. And so
yeah.
Now what's interesting, so Stanford was planning on cutting 11 varsity sports. They've reversed that. And that is happening across a lot of schools where they had this plan, they were going to make cuts, and now they're reversing it. And in some cases, they're reversing it because there have been a number of Title IX lawsuits that were filed as a result. So,
because you're changing your mix of teams.
Yeah, the ratio there. Okay, so there's a whole lot going on there. And in the case of both, I just think there's a whole lot, I would say, of course I would say this, I think there's a whole lot, so as we talked about vaccinations or we talk about sports, I think there's a whole lot to say about how the promise that you are making to your students, how you market that, and in both of those cases. Okay, my third article is about tuition growth. So the headline, the pandemic slowed tuition growth at some colleges. Will it last? And I'll get, anytime there's a headline with a question mark, the answer is no.
Don't bury the lead. Yeah. What is the answer? No?
Yeah, no. Will it slow tuition growth at some schools? Yes, at some schools. So they did see that. They looked at the top 53 colleges according to the U.S. News and World Rankings on liberal arts colleges, and so they looked at 53 schools. 17 of those 53 either froze or actually cut tuition
over the last year.
Yeah, and so, but as it goes through, it shows that yes, there was a temporary slowdown, and now schools are coming back with tuition increases. And if you look at your institution, I'd love to hear from you all. And just looking at everyone who's joining us and thinking about their schools, I'd be really curious, did your school go back to the increases of the past, or are they slowing down or even cutting tuition?
And I feel like we've talked to some schools who have used this opportunity, especially smaller schools, to right-side themselves, where they were like, hey, we just kind of over the last 7 years just like rode this train forward, and then here's an opportunity for us to right-side our tuition.
Yeah.
But also, I think in general, if you can get away with a tuition increase, you do, right? So.
Well, and yes, and some of it might be required as we're looking at the cost of a lot of things going up. So there's a lot to be considered there. My last article fits right into our topic today, and is online campus counseling here to stay? And so this is one of those where before COVID, in 2019, fewer than 8% of colleges offered telephone therapy, and only 3% offered video therapy. And so it's a tough shift. As many of you know, if you have students from all over just trying to do the cross-state counseling, there's a lot of regulation in place, and so state licensing requirements were definitely at play. In college counseling centers worldwide conducted nearly 70 times more video sessions this last year. They averaged 1,165 video sessions. So,
listen, I have a lot to say about this because first of all, Brian Carr from Winsburg is joining us, and he and I were talking yesterday. He was like, I never get no-showed now that I'm doing video advising, like video meetings with students, because at the very last second, students can be like, okay, I'm going to join. And then they have the conversation and they're done. It's not like a big, and you've got to get dressed and go to my office and like all that stuff.
Yeah.
But also, a year and a half ago, the idea of video counseling or video advising or even telehealth.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to talk to the doctor on the video. Well, now we've had that forced for a year and a half. So we're all used to it. So it does seem crazy that I have to get dressed when I don't feel good, make an appointment, go down, sit in the waiting room, wait for the doctor, go into the room,
have everyone else look at you when you're in the waiting room.
Have everyone else look at you, wait for them to, right? So there's something about just having had that experience that then makes it much easier and much more approachable, because we've already done it before. So why wouldn't we just keep doing it? So I think for sure that's there. And I think, Matt, as we've talked about Kintsugi, like what good things come out of what we've experienced, hands down, that's going to be one of those things where call your doctor, let them look down your throat and have them prescribe some medicine.
So our good friends at Timely MD, they say they are now serving 10 times more students than they were at the beginning of 2020. So
yeah, I totally believe it. That's
great,
a good one.
Great service. Yeah. All right, that's the State of the Union.
Okay, so let's talk about the future. I want us to start with fall 2021, just imagining, first of all, who's going to come to campus, and then I want us to imagine what they may have experienced over the last 17 months. So remember that we've talked about you have freshmen, sophomores, and juniors. And I mean, we could throw seniors in there. But freshmen, sophomores, and juniors coming to your campus who have not had a complete and whole college experience, 2 semesters tied together.
Yeah.
With the caveat, my caveat for all of this is like, or they have. Because depending on what you've done at your school, if you sent them home in March, in 2020, or so there's a lot of discrepancies on what people did.
Yeah.
But it is completely possible that you will have 3 classifications of students who have not had a whole 2-semester experience on your campus. And so we talk about your freshmen who are coming. Last year, they had either no senior year because they were homeschooled or video, like Zoom schooled, or they had a really strange senior year with no gatherings and masks and all of that kind of stuff. So those are your freshmen. And then your junior year was interrupted.
Yeah.
Right? So those are freshmen. They're coming off of that experience, and now they're going to come to your campus for the first time. And then sophomores, can you give us what sophomores experience?
Just to go back to those freshmen, because so you think about this incoming cohort and all the things that they went through before they get to your campus and trying to start college life. One thing that we always talk about is the impact of students who transfer in credits, either dual credits or AP credits, and the number of students because of their Zoom class experience. You may have a lower number of students, fewer students who actually completed AP or dual credit, and we know that those students are always a higher risk population. And so there's so many factors that are coming in with that group, and so with sophomores, they had their interrupted senior year, and then when they came to you, it was distanced, or they had to do it online. Right.
So sophomores, like, they didn't have graduation. Their classes were canceled, right? They didn't have graduation from high school. And then in their freshman year, it's like orientation and welcome week and all of the events and all of the first year experience, things that you would say for that group of students, like, hey, we want you to come and we're going to make you part of our community. They did not have, most likely, the same experiences that your previous freshmen.
Some schools were really creative in how they would engage those incoming freshmen in the things that they did, either virtually or if they were able to be on campus socially distanced. But when you think about all the years building out your FYE program, how much you've invested in that, and you've tweaked it, and and we're going to have our University 100 or our core class that we're all going to share, or our common readings, and we're going to discuss it.
And freshman follies, and right, and Twister, and all of the stuff. In fact, I was talking to somebody the other day, and he was like, he said for last fall, he had to plan 3 different orientation formats: online, in person, and then hybrid.
Wow.
And so then administration was asking him to do that again this summer. And he's like, no, I can't. Like, I need to put up some boundaries because I cannot do that again. So there's just a lot of not optimal or ideal experiences for those freshman students who now will be coming back as sophomores, right? And then you have juniors who were interrupted in their freshman year. So that means like picking roommates and getting registered and all of that kind of stuff. They didn't have that because likely you sent them home around March. And then their sophomore year, they've come back and they've had that distance experience where they're in single rooms, or they're not eating in the cafeteria together, or they're not having those events. So there's just a lot of discombobulation for all of those different areas of cohorts of students.
So when you think about your juniors and what happened to them their sophomore year, because we always talk about sophomore slump, this was like a great definition of sophomore slump. And And when you think about, this is when you're kind of starting to get into your majors, you're starting to meet your faculty in that major, you're meeting your peers in that major. And so when I think about the impact there, that and also for STEM heavy majors, there's going to be, where if they were in a virtual environment or even hybrid and having to crank through some really complicated things like organic chemistry, there's
academic effects of that.
A real challenge there.
Yeah. Okay, so you have students, and we're going to talk about what their experiences may have been, but just as you're thinking about cohorts, those are kind of the different school experiences that they may have had. But we're also thinking about in the fall bringing back your employees who have also had very, very varied experiences and different circumstances over the past 17 months. And so just thinking about, in general, we'll talk more about like individual experiences, but just as like a broad brush, you think about employees who have been working from home, they've been doing online schooling or homeschooling for some of them. So they've been in the same house with all of their kids, or they've had the luxury of being able to send their kids to school, although that is looking a lot different in terms of having to wear masks and like all the precautions that they're taking. You have employees who have experienced sickness themselves, their kids getting sick, their parents getting sick. You have employees who have had deaths in their family or significant illness where people that they love have been hospitalized. Matt, you and I were talking about even just, so I've been very fortunate in that our family has not had COVID, but we had to be quarantined twice. So I had to keep my daughter home from school twice for 2 weeks each time. That was really a difficult experience. So you have parents who are dealing with that. And then also, as we've been talking about with students, parents who have been furloughed from your institution, who have financial pressures, who have job stresses because they've had to adapt what they're doing to an online environment, or like these three modes of delivering what they're doing. And then also all of the stuff about us being in the same house together all the time where we don't have space or internet to support our work and our school. And so all of that stuff mixed with all of the student stuff that we've already talked about makes for, I think, a pretty delicate and wounded campus for some people.
Absolutely. So I just, as you went through that, and I was just thinking about, in every single one of those things that you're talking about, you could just map out what's my role in that situation. What is my responsibility in that either with my family, or I have a loved one who's sick, or something,
You're saying like the mental and emotional pressure of like, this is how I experienced that thing.
Yeah. And so when you think about that, and then you also consider what we've talked about over the summers, where usually you're able to kind of take a break and your responsibilities are relieved somewhat, and you're able to recharge. And this, we haven't had that summer yet. And so
these are like caregivers giving care in 18 different ways, right? For their family, for their students, for their institution, for their community, for their parents. Yeah, for sure. So given those different kind of bins of what people may have experienced, I think if we talk about not just how the last 17 months have affected you in those areas, but if we think about people as very individualistic, this is like a thread that has been running through our conversations for the last year, that people are people and you can't make assumptions about them because you don't know, and you actually are harmful when you decide like, hey, I know about you without asking. So even just thinking about how the difference in your experience is affected by who you are and your environment in life and those sorts of things. So I want to unpack a couple of those. I want to start with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so you guys will remember at the very top, we're talking about self-actualization. And then we go down into the more foundational needs, things like food and shelter, and then the idea of security, and then love and belonging. And so for some people who are coming to your campus, they are really thinking at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs in terms of how this pandemic has affected them. They haven't been able to travel. They haven't been able to pursue things that bring them joy. They have hobbies or things that they wanted to do that they have, haven't been able to do that. There's this self-actualization piece, which is absolutely true. And they're coming back and thinking like, hey, I'm so glad to be able to be with people again and to pursue these things that I love. That is an absolute luxury to be able to be at that place, no less difficult for those people. But also, you have a lot of people, employees and students, who are going to come back and say, this hit me at the core of my needs in terms of food and shelter and my loved ones and feeling safe and secure.
I think that's the thing that really shocked me in the assessment that we did with Macmillan is that, so there may have been students who actually finally got to that place because they're earning a degree and they're able to achieve things for themselves. And so they're seeing their future and what their career is going to be. And all of a sudden,
because we've taken care of that stuff, right? Like
right.
You have food and you have a room and you have the library and you're safe and yeah, exactly.
And then that rug is pulled and they fell all the way down to, they went home and they didn't have food. I mean, we had 10 or 11% of students who said they had food insecurities. And so that was shocking to me.
And the other one, Matt, I think is like unsafe families. So you think about safety, like we know students who are like, this is my safe place. I don't have to be in either a physically abusive family or a mentally or emotionally abusive family. And so we took that away from them and sent them home. And a lot of these fundamental needs were really taxed over the last 7 years.
So I would argue that every single one of us, wherever we were, fell down at least to the rung of safety, especially in the beginning. That's really what we all, so just thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and safety and how he says, you want order, predictability, and control. Well, all of a sudden we were told we have 15 days where the most predictable thing is just stay at home. And that is the security that we have. Well, for a lot of people, we found that wasn't very great.
So another really interesting thing about that you were saying as we were discussing this earlier is the idea that these inequities have existed. They haven't been as transparent, which that's helpful because it means that we can create programs and resources to be able to address them. But also there is this experience of people weren't talking about the fact that when I went home for the summer, I didn't have internet or that my family was unsafe or that I didn't have food or whatever. And now I feel like everywhere I go, although they don't know they're talking about me, there's all this conversation about poor Rachel. She has some difficulties that she is going to need to overcome in order to be successful. And the balancing act of absolutely communities need to know those things so that we can be supportive and helpful. And also the feeling that the spotlight is being shined on things that when I just came to campus, nobody had to know about that stuff because it was provided. So you didn't have to know that when I went home, I didn't have all the food I could eat because I was here with you guys eating the same things. So it is a really tricky balance of saying both I see you and also not making a person feel like something about them all of a sudden because you recognize there are people in the world who have these issues that they're dealing with. Right? So, okay, another experience kind of framework for people's experience that I think is really helpful is about personality. And, Matt, you and I have like a billion conversations a year about personality and trying to figure out why people work the way they do and how they think about things and kind of how do we understand these differences in personality. And so we have some examples of this, but the reason I bring up this personality piece is because I love personality because it's like, however I approach the world, it's easy for me to think that everybody does approach the world that way. And then when you start doing Myers-Briggs or Enneagram or any of those personality assessments, you're like, it never would occur to me that you would have that experience.
Yeah.
It is so foreign from how I would make sense of that, or how I would approach that, or what I would do about that, right? That was very enlightening to hear that that's what you experienced about that. So I think my caution in personality is just that we remember that nothing is a foregone conclusion, and that you will have employees and students who experienced similar things to you but have made sense of it in very different ways, right?
Right.
We're laughing because we had this conversation today about like how you experience things, and Matt's a leader, and so his like inclination is always go fix the problem. Like the first thing you do is go fix the problem. So I was saying something about people experiencing an earthquake, and like some people stay in their house because that's where they feel safe, and when I said that, he looked at me like, have you lost your mind? Why would you stay in your house if there's an earthquake? Like, you have to go out and find people and make sure everything's okay, and like get secure water for your community, you know? And I was like, no, some people need to stay in their house because that's how they're going to feel safe and take care of their family. And he just looked at me like I was making it up, but I'm not making it up. Some people would do that.
Stay in bed.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's, you don't have to be snarky about it. But that's a great experience. I mean, that's a great example of like, that would never occur to me to respond in that way, right? So some examples of this are managers, people who, in fact, Rachel Elam and I were having this conversation about her strength and her skill for the last 17 months has been to manage and to keep everything stable, and to keep people calm at schools, and to help them feel like, I know everything's changing, but here's what we're going to do. We're just going to stay very still and stable as much as we can, and we're going to give you a place to be settled. And that is where she shines and she's most comfortable. She's so good at being like, I'm going to provide a place for you to be settled. Now, as we're thinking about changing, like new things are coming, and now it's not so much about staying settled, but about what's on the horizon and what are we going to do next. And she's like, I don't really love that, right? That's not my favorite thing for us to talk about. And that's a great example of how her experience of being in this sweet spot, not that it has not been incredibly difficult for her, but she's been gifted and talented to be able to do those things. And as you think about a change coming, she's like, I mean, I'm pretty good at managing what we've done for the last 17 months. I don't know if I want things to be that much different as we go forward. I want them to be less stressful, but I don't know that I want us to like go crazy with new ideas and moving forward and doing a whole bunch of stuff. Does that make sense?
And there are some of us who are on the other side where we've been kind of felt like we've been put into neutral, and, you know, trying to figure out, well, where are the opportunities? What are the new things that we could be doing when the time just wasn't right for that? And so
yeah, we can't move forward because we're just trying to manage what's happening right now, right? And so for some people, they're going to be coming out of that raring to go, like, okay, we've got all these new things. And then you have some people who are going to move out of that really, not sadly, I don't know what the right word is, just cautiously. They're going to move out of that very cautiously, right? So that, I think stability and change would be the same thing. You have people who like stability and you like things to be predictable. And then you have some people who are like, I like it to be different all the time. And so depending on your preference, you will experience the fall in two completely different ways.
And I think that's the thing, Rachel, is you have to step back and realize each of us individually have gone through this thing together. And we've talked about that, but you've helped me see that through this other perspective of we've also processed it differently. You know, there are things that we've talked about with Kintsugi. There are things that we love. Some of us love different things, you know, than what I love. You know, but there are things that were good and came out of it that we loved. And on the flip side, there were things that other people loved this thing and I hated it, right? So I
I
think,
think introversion and extroversion is such a great example of that, right? Where, so you and Braden and I are all introverts, and we're like, I mean, it's not that bad. You know, I'm gonna stay home and like not have, it's not that bad. And then you have some people like my daughter who's like depressed if she goes these couple of months without spending time with people.
yeah.
And so we were saying the other day, like when my shipped groceries come and like the new rule is they have to just drop it out, like the people who are delivering it just drop it in front of my door. And I don't have to invite them in and small talk with them. I'm thrilled. That is the thing I would like for us to keep in place for the rest of my life, right? But there are other people who be like, it's so sad because I used to know the person who did my grocery shopping and I'd ask them about their granddaughter and like, how's it going with you? Two completely different perspectives of what we've just been through.
And I continued to go grocery shopping.
You're going to be sad when everyone starts going grocery shopping and it's going to get real busy.
I think also the way that you, well, it's like you were saying, just the way that you interact with people. And I would say just the role of masks in that, making that even more difficult. Right? Or
easier.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I like to hide behind that because no one's paying attention to me or whatever your experience of that is. There's one more here that we have in personality, which I want to talk just very briefly about because I think it's a little bit dangerous. So we have to be careful. But you, just as an acknowledgement, you have people who value freedom over order, and you have people who value order over freedom. And I know that the further we play that out, the stickier it gets. But just to say, do not make an assumption on either side. That if you are a person who value freedom, that everybody is going to be like, yeah, it's so stupid that we have to whatever. And that if you're a person who values order, that everybody is going to be like, yeah, we should all do whatever the institution tells us. And so just having that dichotomy that you could approach someone being like, isn't it so crazy that we've had to or that we haven't? And that they would be like, I think about that in completely a opposite way than you do, I think is really important language for us to understand. And related, you think about individuality versus community. So my right to do what I want to do versus we should always do what's best for everybody, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you think about, faculty are known for their independence and their desire to have their own autonomy and how that fits in, especially thinking about, they definitely have a strong voice for that, right? And so again, as you and I have talked about, just stepping back, wherever you are on this scale, there are other people on your campus who you love, who are great partners, who you have to work with. You're in the same community, but you have experience you've experienced something in two different ways, even though it's the same thing. And also you have to move forward and find unity in that so that you can be really great at this coming year.
And I love the language of personality because it gives us a way to talk about it without being like, man, you're really stupid because you experienced it that way, right? It's just like, hey, this is how I experienced it, but you're opposite from me. So I would assume that maybe it was different for you. Tell me about that. And I like that because it is no right, wrong, bad, good. Just at any problem we approach, we are very different, and it makes sense then that we would have different experiences, and we should be able to talk about those and share those with mutual understanding. But the first piece of that is being able to say, we probably didn't have exactly the same experience and have not interpreted that in the exact same way, right?
Right.
Okay, another thing that I want us to think about as we're talking about who's going to come to our campus and also as you're thinking internally is the role of leadership and responsibility. And so this is a really difficult one, I think, because so many of us in varied levels and different ways have had the responsibility of keeping people safe and whole, or even keeping safe and whole. So we think about our experience of keeping our families safe and whole. And, if you are the one, like I was in my family, my whole family is staying at home. Clint's working from home. Lillian's not going to school, but I'm still going to work and I'm still going grocery shopping. I'm still doing those things, right? If you were the one who was venturing out into the world, Matt, we said it was like, it's like you're on a mission to try to keep your family whole and safe, because if these people get sick, it's going to be my fault. I'm
Yeah.
going to have brought it home. And the anxiety and the stress that comes from trying to keep your family whole and safe, not only because you're leaving, but also just in general. Like, I want these people to be healthy.
Yeah,
Right?
my first trip to the grocery store was pretty stressful. In my return, I mean, I felt like I had just gone out into some apocalyptic movie,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'm geared up, and I come home, and it's like I need to scrub everything, and it was very stressful in that.
Yeah.
And so just thinking about that, and it is the weight of it that
Yeah.
I think everything that you said, the weight of keeping your family safe, the weight of having that responsibility.
And also the decisions you have to make. Do we send them to school? What is that going to look like? Right? Just all of that weight that is laid on you, because the consequences can be serious.
Yeah.
But also you think about that in terms of decisions you guys were making for your students and for your employees. Okay, we're not going to open in person, or you're going to wear masks, or this is how we're going to do our quarantine, or here's how we're going to do our testing. The weight of that, the weight of keeping our institutions whole. So we want to protect people, but we also want to have a healthy institution when we're finished. The ways that we were thinking about keeping our community whole, and how we're good neighbors to each other in the middle of this craziness. And everybody is going to have a dramatically different experience of that, although we all were in the same 17 months,
Yeah.
right? And so not making an assumption about how leadership and responsibility felt to you. There are some people who are like, I felt really good, like I just made those decisions and I didn't feel overwhelmed about them. And then there's some people for whom, that is not a thing that they want to do. They don't want to ultimately be responsible for everybody's safety. And so that's debilitating and feels really overwhelming. So I think considering how people experience leadership and responsibility and what their experience did to them over that time is going to be really important.
So, and just as I said in the beginning, when I think of just reflecting on the weight of waiting, there's a lot of weight in just the like not being able to move forward, not feeling like that it would be in the best interest of everyone you love or that you serve, to be in kind of mad mode.
Yeah. You're saying we're lucky you didn't take all of your family and move off somewhere so that you could just like have a controlled, like, here's the plan.
Maybe.
Okay. One more thing for experiences that I want us to think about, and that is outcomes. And so, I said a little bit earlier, you have people who have experienced significant illnesses. You have people who've experienced mild illnesses. You have people who have lost people that they love in very difficult circumstances where they may not have been able to care for them or to say goodbye to them. You have people who were exposed and did quarantine and did isolation and couldn't be with their family. You have people who had no exposure, who didn't have not only illness, but didn't have close family members who had any kind of exposure. And then also you have people who have been able to be vaccinated or are not concerned about being vaccinated. And so all of those outcomes are going to come into play when you're talking to a person about their last 17 months experience, and creating the right kind of conversation where you're not making assumptions about what it's been like for them.
Yeah. I think
anything to add to that?
No, I think that's really an important, just, it's like, I think, as I think about where we were and when we started and we were having conversations right in the beginning with Anthony Melchiori and his perspective coming from, being in New York and the things that he was experiencing, even though in our city we weren't in that place, I suddenly felt much more responsibility because I was listening to, what his experience was, um, and I don't know it. I think that helped shape the, hey, you have to listen, you have to understand that the things that you're experiencing are not what everyone else is.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so having some sensitivity and understanding about the fact that we have all experienced this in a different way, I think is going to be really helpful in the fall, because it creates space for the right kind of conversations, and just to be thoughtful, on the academic side and the student development side, of having those reminders for your team that you don't know what people have been through, and here are different ways to think about that, and it's going to be important for them to have the opportunity to articulate their experiences and the hardships for them, and then also the things that, as we move into hopefully a new phase, they're nervous about or they're excited about,
Yeah.
or being able to give them space to do that. But I would also say, you guys have heard me say a million times that the cause of most trouble, when it comes to, as we think about it as counselors, the cause of most trouble is that you had some really great behavior, a very adaptive behavior, that then circumstance changed and you forgot to be like, hold on a second, that doesn't make sense anymore. I should probably do something else, right? So some examples of this would be, if you have a 4-year-old and you're making them take naps every day, because that's what we do with 4-year-olds, if you have not, by the time they're 9, stopped to be like, hey, that doesn't make sense anymore. When they were 4, it was a good idea. Now we're fighting about it all the time because that's not actually education or life cycle appropriate. That is a behavior that was appropriate in one place, but then because you did not stop to assess how things were changing, it's now a maladaptive behavior. And so we have this in relationships, we have this in life. A lot of times, if you look at a thing that you're doing over and over and it's not working, it's because it got created in a place and a time when it was working, when it was super helpful, but you didn't stop to say, oh my goodness, everything has changed now, and so now we're going to do things really differently. So examples of this are like, if we think about adaptive behavior that was helpful, we think about wearing our masks, this attitude that we're very vigilant of danger, which is exactly what you're saying, Matt. Like when you go to the grocery store, you're like, oh my gosh, something can come and hurt my family. I have to be very aware of it and very careful at all times. Seeing others as kind of threatening, and I know that we love people and we're not like, that person's threatening me, but also they can make me sick, they can make my family sick, right?
Right.
You were talking about one of your kids' teachers who was like, basically treating students like they were a threat to her, which understandably, that's adaptive behavior.
Yeah, day one, it was pretty clear she did not want any contact. She didn't want to be. She forget 6 feet. I think she had a 10-foot barrier, in her classroom, and she just made it really clear. Now, because I tried to encourage my son with some student development, I said, well, do you know why? Is someone in her family sick, or who's she worried about? And yeah, her husband was very sick or immune compromised, and so she had to be. Well, that idea though was really clear, that she viewed every student in her classroom as potential danger to her family.
Right, because that was potential danger for them. So thinking about the ways that we adapted in the beginning to be very careful and to be vigilant, as we were saying, but then also that becomes comfortable for us. We can stay in that mindset. I told you at the very beginning of the pandemic that I thought it was going to be like my great grandmother in the Depression, where she was saving tinfoil and paper clips because she lived through having nothing. And she was like, I will never do that again.
Right.
That's a great example of behavior that's super adaptive at the time and completely appropriate. But then we get down the line a little bit and you're like, we need to reconsider some of that, maybe to the extent to which you're doing that, or the internal pressure that you're putting on yourself to do those things, because things are changing now. Things are a little bit different, right?
Yeah. So I was thinking about just the mentality of, I'm just going to have a stiff upper lip through this thing. I don't want my kids to see that I'm scared, or that there's that all these the weight of all of this is falling. So there's I think a lot of us in a lot of different ways we're masking that, and trying to keep people from seeing really what was happening to us. And I think our students were doing that too. And as we were talking about mental notes and what's going to be coming onto our campus in the fall, I think there's a whole lot of that piled in, where just kind of wound tight.
Can we talk about it now?
Yeah.
Can we tell the truth about it now?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, we just have PTSD. We haven't kind of been in that place where what you talk about, just we need to make that normalized. We need to talk about that with our students and with our colleagues, because we all carried that weight, and we tried to mask the most of us, how that was affecting us.
For sure. I think that's such a good point, because I think both parents and kids had that experience, right? My daughter doesn't want me to be worried about her, and I don't want her to be worried about me, so we're not having real conversations, perhaps when we should. So you guys, I would take this idea of maladaptive behavior, or adaptive behavior that then becomes maladaptive. I would just take it as a way to have good conversations with people about change. So I've said to you, Matt, my daughter loves wearing her mask. She would wear it all the time if she could. We are in a city that has had like 10 days with no infections, where it's a very safe city. We haven't had a lot of difficulty. I have had to say to her, hey, there was a time and a place where you had to do that, but you have to stop, because that's not the life that we're going to be living anymore. I know you feel safe. I know you're used to it, but things are changing now. And so we're going to go out and enjoy the outside without having to have our masks on, without having to worry about that thing. And being able to recognize you did the right thing here, but now we're going to rethink that, because it's not real life for you to, from the time you're 9 until you're 100, go out wearing your mask every time you leave the house, right? So using that as a good way to have conversation about how things are changing for your students and also for your employees as well. One nice thing I think that comes out of adaptive to maladaptive behavior is that some things are always going to be great ideas. They were adaptive when COVID hit, and then we're like, yeah, keep washing your hands, guys.
Don't mind food service having a mask on. Right.
Yeah. Hand sanitizer. That's a great idea. You could do that occasionally. We were talking about things like Zoom, counseling on Zoom or Zoom advising. What a great idea. Why aren't we doing that all the time? We should keep that. That's going to work super well, right? I love you were saying assessing for inequity and making sure that we have a holistic picture of people.
Yeah. Why are we just now doing that?
Yeah. So there are those behaviors that we're also going to keep because they make a lot of sense, but we just want to make sure that we're not holding on to it just because we've gotten used to it and it feels better for us. And so I think especially in the fall, you're going to be able to have great conversations with students to help them understand, yes, there is safety in continuing to do the things that have kept you safe, except things are a little bit different now, and so you don't have to have that same sort of posture towards it as maybe you had before.
So I think, again, just this is, as I said in the beginning, where this gets a little harder for me is to make that list of I had these adaptive behaviors over the last 16 months. This is how I handled this situation. But stepping back, starting with yourself to step back and say, this is no longer healthy. We're not in a place where that makes sense anymore.
And I just would like to add to that is a discipline, because every time you make a change of anything, it is a discipline to say, no, it's a new habit. You're breaking an old habit and you're making a new habit. And so that's really difficult and it feels uncomfortable. Yeah. So I think making that list and then understanding those things they don't fall away easily, especially when you've had such a mindset of protect my family, be safe, be careful. This is very dangerous. We have to be worried about it.
Well, I know that we have to do that in order to be able to lead our students through that process also, right?
Yeah. So really, I mean, my conclusion as we think through what's happening in the fall is that this is really about, we talk about the stages of change. There's pre-contemplation where you're not even thinking about changes you have to make. And then there's contemplation where you start thinking like, oh, actually that's weird. Or, oh, I want to do something different. Or I think this would be a better choice. And I am not, so I'm going to break your heart, Matt, because the other stages of change are like preparation and action, which I know you would like for us to spend a lot of time on. But today, I'm just saying, if we can go from pre-contemplation about people's experiences, how they differ from you, what they went through, how they're making sense of it, what behaviors were good and now maybe are going to need to change, and how that's going to be difficult for people. If we can do that internally and start applying some of those principles and that language to ourselves, I think it gives us an opportunity to do that for our students and our coworkers and our employees when we get to school in the fall.
Yeah.
Because being able to have the language to say, that's really interesting that you loved that. I hated that part. Tell me what you loved about it. Oh, that makes perfect sense for you that you would have liked that part. Or I hear you complaining about this part. That part was one of my favorite parts of the whole pandemic, how I didn't have to talk to anybody,
Yeah.
right? Or whatever the thing is, I think then provides an opportunity to really give good support to our students and our colleagues who are going to come together in the fall in this kind of mismatch of whatever happened over the last 17 months.
I think a great way to start is with your closest, either family or friends, to just go through this process. And it will be eye-opening, just as it was, Rachel, as we were talking about it, how you get to that contemplation at a different speed and you have a totally different lens.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to leave us with a couple of thoughts. Matt and I were thinking through. We just I couldn't stop at contemplation. He pressed me to be like, but what are they going to do? So here are a couple of things that you can do besides applying this to yourself, thinking about it for your family. I would say remembering the discipline of relationships. So remember before the pandemic how the big thing we were talking about is that everyone is disconnected because they're looking at their screens. And then we have the pandemic where they literally can only be connected by looking at their screens. And I'm really afraid that some of us have forgotten or even gotten used to this lack of discipline when it comes to relationships. And I was saying to you, and I think I said to Rachel Elam, it's honestly like we're all going back to kindergarten, or we're going to kindergarten. Because you remember when you take your kids to kindergarten or when you're in kindergarten, it's all about like, here's how we spend time together. Here are the rules for being in our classroom together. We have circle time in the morning. We talk about what's important to you and what's going on in the day. Well, we have not had to do that stuff.
Right.
Small talk and hanging out and checking in and having lunches and all of that stuff in the way that we used to. We just have not had to do it. And so I think literally, I know it's funny, but also I'm not kidding. Talking about what is a good friend, when we go to college, what does a good friend look like? There are people who check on other people and listen and spend time with them and are interested in things that are interested to their friends. That kind of practice, because remember, we're adults and we're having a difficult time remembering how to do that. You have people who, in some cases, have taken out 18 months of social interaction when they are still learning it. Middle school and high school is when you are still learning those things. And so I think it's going to be really difficult for them to decide to invest in the discipline of relationships face to face when it's always hard. It's even harder when you have taken some time off and really lost maybe the art of that.
Yeah. So as we had talked about, students cocooning, and we basically for the last year and a half have encouraged them to, and even for our college students who weren't cocooning very well, they got in trouble for that. So
Yeah.
So I do think that coming back and saying, hey, that's not healthy, and that's not why you're here. That's not
Yeah.
what we want from our community is really important.
For sure. And we're going to practice that. We're going to talk about our experiences, and we're going to practice being together, because we've really missed out on practicing that piece.
So just thinking about kindergarten, Rachel,
yeah.
I don't remember kindergarten other than I pretty much felt lost all the time. but some things like as you were talking about kindergarten, I just wrote down, with my kids, some big things like the first 100 days, how that was celebrated.
Yeah.
In a lot of creative ways, just having those markers of things to celebrate.
Sorry, I just took a whole trip there, which is like, you made a friend today, right? Like,
yeah.
Our kids are incarnated. These are the things we're celebrating. You made a friend today. You shared your lunch with somebody.
Right.
So yeah, I think that there's something really important about giving each other grace and saying we are all going to go back to kindergarten, even as adults, and remember what it's like to invest in making a friend today.
Right.
We've done it for 100 days, right?
Yeah. Well, also just having time where, like, I don't know, to me, kindergarten was all about socialization. We're going to go on a field trip, and you're going to have your buddy, and you got to keep up with them, and
Right. But I do think that we just have to practice that stuff. And what I like about it is first year experience oftentimes has already had these things woven in. They are creating opportunities for you to connect with people and for you to find people who are like you and that sort of thing. And so I think if you add this layer of the discipline of relationship, we're just all out of practice, and I don't remember how to small talk or how to walk up to somebody and say hello. That's okay. Like, that can be part of our bonding experience that, we haven't done it for a while and it feels really strange.
But we're going to do it.
We are going to do it. So fall 2021 is coming. It's not imminent. You guys do not hear me say that, because we do have some rest and relaxation that's coming, but I just would love for you to be thinking about those things so that as we get closer to the end of July and you're thinking about implementing what's going to be happening in the fall, you have some of that context to be able to make sense of it for your colleagues and your students.
So Rachel, it seems like that's a to be conclude. We will come back and conclude this with some action items.
Okay, well, you're the president of a company and I'm a counselor, so I will do the contemplation and preparation part, which I feel like I've done, and then you can come back and do the action and the outcome piece. How about that?
Sure. All right.
Okay. All right, sounds good. You guys, thank you so much for joining us. As always, great to spend time with you, and join us next week. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.